So now I'll just go right to the top of what I got here. And I'm really into color coding for myself. So in this area, I've got shades of green. It just helps me see without having to focus too much on this stuff. So I know that all my drum stuff up here at the top, this is all drum stuff, percussion. You can see the colors go to brown for bass, orange for guitar, strings I have ready to go, reds for the vocals, and then back to green again for my effects here, and then red. So up here, all drums. I have two players here. And I often use the Massey DRT to create my sample track, or my trigger track. Drumagog, I love it. I love their electronic drum sounds. It's really about all I use on it. And then I have some of my own samples in there. I like doing my own filtering for mastering. I'd rather mastering do as little as they can. That's my goal. So this is usually for my subs. If I need something in the middle, or sometimes a snare, rarely a snare. I rarely do a snare sample. But I'll often use this for the mid hardness of a kick if I need it. This only gets used half the time, this all the time. My SansAmp, you've seen me use that. I use it for all sorts of things, snare, kick, low end, mid-range, whatever. Sort of a reverb on the snare, add length if it's a flat sounding short snare but I want length. Instead of using reverb, I'll use that. Omnipressor's on there to help that. About that. And here's another, a setup for my overheads usually. If I want to get some crunch out of the overheads. And I've got this Axis EQ on here, which I love. It has saturation on it, which is a really great saturator. 1 dB steps, which I really like on an API style EQ, which I'm very familiar with. And a phase button, which for me, EQing, especially in drums, I just don't want to use an EQ that doesn't have a phase button. It's just, I know I can put another plugin in there, but that's another plugin, and it's another thing I have to switch to. I'd rather just have it all in one place, and I can, because I do, every time I change the EQ, I hit the phase button, or at least every 3 or 4 times I EQ, I hit the phase button just to see what it's doing. Then these are my sort of additional effects tracks, my sample tracks, and then here my mix bus tracks. Which just quickly, because I've gone through these before, I just have stuff here ready to go, so I don't have to use the drop-down windows. The things that I use most are here, bypassed. It has happened that I've used all of them, not that often. I'll choose between the pusher and the devil lock. I sometimes don't have anything on this channel clean, but I'll really mess up this one and mix it in a little bit, or just the opposite. I have some things waiting in the wings over here if I want this Trans-X, or I have, I don't have it here, but I usually have a Transient Designer here. It's also Oxford Involution, all really good ways of manipulating transients. I like them all. They work differently on different songs, but it's just ready to go. I have the ML4000 here. It's just a holdover from when I used to have it on there. I rarely actually use it on the channels, but they're there if I want them. I have a dedicated drum effects track. I may use this to beef up the snare. I go to great lengths to get my snare drum sound with what's there and not a sample. Same with the kick drum, but subs, I like the clean electronic drum sound from Drumagog. Really nice pure tones mixed in with SansAmp harmonics and live drum harmonics. I really like the manipulating that. Here's a percussion track. You can see I've got Axis on there. I've got this BX saturator in the wings. I've got a filter EQ style waiting, and I've got this Fairchild, just because it sounds good on percussion to me. Bass, this would be, I've got my SansAmp waiting in the wings, a Decapitator, a couple of UAD amps, and the SiQ from Sound Toys, which is just, fantastic equalizer that this often I drag down to the guitar individual audio channels. I use that a lot on my guitars. Then I have my guitar subgroup, more different kinds of EQ, and in a Fairchild. Strings, if there's strings in the song, or sometimes I use this for synths, grouping the synths together. I've got an ATR here set up as a short delay with some wobble. Satins here, in case I want to do some real crazy saturation. This other saturator, the BX. I really like this for just having, you can have long delays. I often shorten those, really dull them out here, and really crank up the wow and a bit of flutter. And especially on short delays, just mixed in a little bit. You can see it's 90% dry. It just gives a really nice slank to the synths or strings or horns or whatever it is. I really love this. And then we got background vocals ready to go with a trove of background vocal tracks. I can do some overall, carving with all this different stuff. I often like a little bit of micro shift on the backgrounds when I need it. It's there waiting. Sometimes this de-ester doesn't work, and I go to the FabFilter one. It's right there to try. This is just a holding channel. So when I bring the vocal channel in, I can drag and drop what I want. I listen to the vocal and determine what I want to start with. It's often the double lock. I love the double lock on vocal. The Kaya is something I use a lot on vocals. So is Decapitator. Those are my three main saturators for vocals. They get used a lot. And then I have different compressors. These are my favorites to use on the actual vocal channel. This EQ, I just love it. It's just so easy to use and automate and change, and it's surgical, or it'll dig out with a snow shovel. It's great. That I feed into my lead vocal channel. So on this channel, the volume will be used mainly to do my de-essing. I have these de-essers here that I put in right away so I can start getting sounds right away. They often will come off or get greatly reduced once I start actually doing my manual de-essing. I prefer the manual de-essing, and that's just as you'd imagine. It's grunt work. It takes a long time, but I think it's the only way I can get it to sound the way I want it to sound. So this channel then gets fed. This is my audio channel for vocal. With selection of these. These won't all be in, okay? Volf. Sometimes I use that. Mic Mod Effects. Like I said, I'll drag and drop these onto the actual vocal channel and end up with, 4 or 5 of these bits. And then I'll hide that. And then this is my sub-channel for the vocal. And I often get most of this in there. I love the Phoenix. I've got an Eve here, which I love that EQ. That's a mainstay EQ for me for all the audio. Here's this suppressor, which is wonderful for just catching the things you don't hear. I've got 2 different EQs for my high frequency. One, sometimes this works on the vocal, other times it doesn't, and then I prefer the 1A. Generally, it's the really high end I'm going for with these 2, but it changes. whatever the song needs. Aphex is another one for that, for some high hashy kind of high ends, which I like. So this often gets on. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's there if I need it. And then the final stage is this. And this for me is just kind of a smoother for all this stuff, just to catch little bits and pieces. It's really, none of these are hitting more than like -1, -2. So I might have 3 compressors on there. They're all hitting -1. And that gives me the sound I want. That gives me more of the sound out of an analog, like from an analog compressor, where you might use one analog compressor. I just find that when you do that with plugins, I start hearing artifacts when you start getting to the extremes of the compressors, and then you get a buildup of artifacts, and I don't seem to get that by mixing it up and having each one do a little bit of the job.